All right, so I'm going to get started. Hi, everyone. Welcome. My name is Marika Azoff, and I am the Good Food Institute's Corporate Engagement Specialist, and I'm focused on our Sustainable Seafood Initiative. I'm so happy to be here with you all today to talk about alternative seafood. Just a few housekeeping items before we start. This webinar is being recorded. We'll send you a copy of it after the presentation, and it will also be available on our YouTube channel for future use. You'll see the chat area. Please feel free to use this to introduce yourselves and comment as we go throughout the presentation. I can't see it, but I will definitely take a look at it after the presentation. But please ask your questions in the Q&A section at the bottom, not in the chat. So the presentation will be about 45 minutes long, followed by a 10 to 15 minute Q&A. Please feel free to ask your questions in that Q&A area throughout the webinar so you don't forget. Jen Lammy, GFI's Senior Sustainable Seafood Initiative Manager, will be monitoring the Q&A box and the chat. And she'll respond to the quick questions in the Q&A area and save the ones that require longer answers or a discussion for the end. And she'll also be joining us for the Q&A. So as some of you may know, GFI just published a mid-year State of the Industry report focused solely on the alternative seafood industry. So this report spans 2020 and the first half of 2021. And during today's webinar, I will be diving into some of the key takeaways from this report and adding some exciting updates that have taken place since it was published at the end of June this year. And after the webinar, you're all invited to join us for an optional one-on-one networking session using the platform MeetAway. So if you haven't yet signed up and would like to, Jen's gonna post the link to register in the chat in a moment. And the MeetAway platform allows you to either select who you want to be paired with to network with, or pairs you automatically based on your shared interests. So I highly recommend joining us for a low pressure, fun way to connect with others who are working in the alternative seafood space or are just interested in it. And each conversation is about 7 minutes long. And I'll leave a couple minutes at the end of this webinar if anyone needs a quick break before diving into networking. So for those of you who are not familiar with our organization, the Good Food Institute, or GFI as I'll call it, is a 501c3 nonprofit, and we're dedicated to accelerating the shift to a sustainable, healthy, and just food system. And if I may brag for just a moment, the past 3 years, we've earned GuideStar's Platinum Seal of Transparency, which is an honor obtained by fewer than 1% nonprofits. And our organization employs over 100 staff around the globe. We have offices in the United States, Brazil, India, Europe, Asia Pacific, and Israel. And we focus on these 3 key programmatic areas. So in our science and technology department, our team of PhD scientists work to advance and open source the foundational science of alternative proteins. In our corporate engagement department, we build relationships with large food manufacturers, meat and seafood companies, and retailers to help them capitalize on opportunities in alternative proteins. And we also provide support to industry entrepreneurs and startups, as well as investors and financial institutions. And our policy team advocates for fair regulation of alternative protein and lobbies for government investment in sustainable protein research and development. And as I mentioned, we're a nonprofit, so we're not a trade association and we don't represent any specific companies. We're funded by generous donors from around the world who believe in our mission. And for anyone listening in today that's part of our family of generous supporters, thank you so much. It's because of you that we can do this impactful work. So thank you. So the key question that GFI kind of exists to address is, how are we going to feed 10 billion people by 2050? And given the fact that the United Nations expects meat demand to grow by more than 50% in that time, how are we going to do so sustainably, efficiently, and safely? And we believe that the answer to this question is to make meat, seafood, egg, and dairy products that people love but to make them in a more sustainable and efficient way. So our approach doesn't involve trying to change consumers' minds or eating habits. Rather, we help the alternative protein industry develop insanely delicious, affordable, and accessible products. So when I use the term alternative proteins, what am I referring to? In a very kind of 101 level, it describes alternative alternative meat, seafood, eggs, and dairy products that are produced using one or more of these production platforms on the side. So plant-based products are created using plant-derived ingredients to replicate the flavor and texture of the conventional protein. And using advanced food science techniques, companies are able to break down the conventional meat products into their most basic components and use plant ingredients to build nearly identical products. Producing alternative proteins through fermentation involves the cultivation of any microbial species to produce either a whole cell biomass or alternative protein inputs or ingredients. And cultivated meat is meat produced directly from animal cells. So the process of cultivating meat uses the basic elements needed to build muscle and fat and enables the same biological processes that happen inside of an animal to happen outside of an animal in these large bioreactors. And cultivated meat is identical to conventional meat at the cellular and molecular level. So I'm not going to dive into these three categories much more, but I really urge you to visit our website to learn more about each of them and download our 2020 State of the Industry reports focused on each of these three platforms. And ultimately, and we're even seeing this now, we're not going to see these three alternative protein production platforms as distinct industry segments, but rather as one large industry where we produce alternative proteins across a spectrum, and we utilize ingredients from one or more technology in any given product. So we're already seeing products kind of existing along this spectrum, such as the Impossible Burger. It's a plant-based burger, but it uses fermentation to produce heme, which is the ingredient that gives it that bloody appearance and meaty taste. We see potential in alternative seafood for a plant-based fish fillet using cultivated fish fat to kind of add to that sensory experience. So let's turn to the main event, which is seafood. Why are we all here today? Why should we care about alternative seafood? Why does GFI have an initiative focused on it? There are a bunch of converging trends such as population increase, a rise and a projected rise in seafood consumption, and the unsustainable overfishing of our oceans that all drive the need for alternative seafood. So we know we can't get much more from the oceans than we already do. Wild-caught seafood catch rates have been pretty much stagnant since about 1990. And as you can see on this graph on the left from the World Resources Institute, they are projected to decline in the coming decades. The Food and Agriculture Organization estimates that only 7% of global fish stocks are underfished, and the rest of the ocean is already fished at maximum capacity. And the aquaculture industry has grown to try to keep up with the demand over the past several decades, but projections show growth slowing based on a number of industry-related challenges. So that's where alternative seafood comes in. It gives us the opportunity to diversify and supplement the total global supply of seafood. And it offers new forms of seafood production to help meet that growing demand. It's also a largely untapped market white space. So while we have the Impossible Whopper being consumed in Burger Kings across North America, and that brand is a household name, we don't yet have anything like that in the plant-based seafood space yet. Oh, sorry. There we go. So I could spend like 3 more webinars talking about the environmental, welfare, and public health benefits of alternative seafood. But given the focus of this webinar, I'll be focusing mainly on the market advantages. So when we talk about the factors that influence purchasing behavior, we talk about price, taste, and convenience. And on the convenience front, alternative seafood production isn't limited to coastal regions the way that much of the conventional seafood industry is. Alternative seafood can be produced in the middle of the country, in a landlocked country, and And some potential benefits of this include cheaper transportation and refrigeration costs and fewer incidents of spoilage, which is a huge issue that the conventional industry faces. And one current barrier to consumption of all alternative proteins is its high cost. So with seafood, conventional seafood is often more expensive than some of the widely consumed terrestrial meat, such as chicken. So therefore, we see there being an opportunity for alternative seafood to reach price parity with conventional seafood more quickly, because the ingredients that go into a plant-based seafood aren't much different than those that go into a plant-based meat, and the same thing with cultivated. The process isn't much different. And lastly, the conventional fishing industry, mainly the wild-caught side, can be volatile and faces challenges of inconsistent supply. So alternative seafood can be produced in response to demand and therefore can better withstand supply and demand shocks, such as the ones that we've seen throughout the COVID-19 crisis. So while the entire alternative protein industry is seeing tremendous growth, alternative seafood is a few steps behind alternative terrestrial meat and dairy. And we can't know all of the reasons for this, but a few possible explanations could be that seafood really has a health halo around it. Doctors around the world are encouraging patients to consume more seafood, whereas they tend to suggest reducing red meat consumption. We also don't hear as much about or talk as much about the mercury, heavy metal, and microplastic contamination in our conventional seafood. And capturing the taste and texture of seafood is a unique challenge. Getting that delicate texture of a flaky whitefish fillet, or the flavor, which it has to be oceany, but we don't want it to be too fishy. So the taste and texture of seafood presents a challenge there. So that's why we have our Global Sustainable Seafood Initiative at GFI, and we're focused specifically on accelerating the development of alternative seafood within our 3 programmatic departments. So again, this presentation is focused on the industry side, but I urge you all to look at our Sustainable Seafood Initiative webpage for a lot of information on the policy and the science and technology side. And Jen's going to share a link to that webpage in the chat in just a moment. So in the next few slides, I'm going to dive into what the alternative seafood commercial landscape looks like. In 2020 and the first half of 2021, there were at least 87 companies developing alternative seafood globally. So the company names are listed out in the report. And I want to mention that the list in the report is meant to be comprehensive, but not exhaustive. So if you know of any companies producing alternative seafood that aren't on the list, or you are a company producing it and you're not on the list, please reach out and we'll get you on our company database right away. And of the 87 companies, the vast majority were developing plant-based products, followed by cultivated and then fermentation derived. And you can see that the majority of these companies are located in North America and Europe, which kind of is reflective of where we're all joining from today. And this map gives us a better visual representation of where the alternative seafood companies and startups are headquartered. So there's really plenty of room to continue expanding in all of the regions. Even 31 is a small number compared to the rest of the alternative meat industry. And seafood preferences vary greatly among consumers, especially by region. So there's room to create products that suit different market needs around the world. And this slide shows the breakdown of the type of seafood products that those 87 companies are developing. As you can see, breaded or battered whitefish is the most common. And these products are appealing to a wide audience. We see them being introduced in quick service restaurants. They're easy to prepare, and the texture and flavor challenges aren't quite as present with the breaded or battered product. But there are far fewer products that might appeal to a more health-conscious consumer who's looking for an alternative to, say, a flaky whitefish fillet or a salmon fillet. So we definitely see a market or an opportunity for more products that can accurately mimic the taste, texture, and nutritional content of of that type of product. In the next few slides, I'm going to highlight some exciting partnerships taking place in the alternative seafood space. So here's an overview of many of the exciting partnerships that took place in 2020 and the first half of 2021. This list is not exhaustive, but it's meant to highlight some of the most significant partnerships. I also threw in a couple that took place after this report was published, and I'll go over those in the following slides. So on this slide, the top half, the blue boxes, contain the alternative seafood companies logo, and the logos in the yellow circles are companies that they've partnered with. And the majority of those companies in the yellow circles are branded manufacturers or companies that have traditionally produced and or sold conventional meat and seafood. So one of the companies that has had a lot of exciting headlines in the past year and a half, or more than that now, is Blue Nalu. They're located in San Diego, California, and working on several different species, but their first product will be mahi-mahi, followed by a bluefin tuna. And Blue Nalu's general approach to species selection is to focus on working with the incumbent seafood industry to supplement current supply. So therefore, they're specifically focused on species that are overfished, primarily imported, or difficult to farm raise. They've had a handful of exciting partnerships over the past year and a half, including ones with animal feed company Nutrico and Pulmuon, a South Korean producer of environmentally friendly food products. A few months ago, they announced that they signed memorandums of understanding with Thai Union and Mitsubishi. And these agreements were designed to assess market development strategies for Blue Nalu's cultivated seafood, specifically in Asia. Most recently, after the report was published, they began working with Nomad Foods, which is a leading frozen food company in Europe. And this agreement will allow the two companies to explore the introduction of cultivated seafood in Europe. And Blue Nalu is currently in the process of getting regulatory approval in the United States and is preparing for regulatory review in other markets. On the plant-based side, we have Good Catch. So in 2016, Gathered Foods launched Good Catch, which is located in Newtown, Pennsylvania, and they produce plant-based shelf-stable tuna, along with frozen appetizers such as crab cakes and breaded fish fillets. And their products contain a blend of 6 different legumes for a cleaner label and a high protein content. In 2020, they entered a joint venture with Bumblebee Foods. And this partnership allows Good Catch to leverage Bumblebee's sales, distribution, and logistics expertise. It also helps to diversify Bumblebee's offerings, allowing it to reach a broader consumer base and profit off the growing plant-based protein trend. And in 2020, Good Catch partnered with the fast casual chain Veggie Grill in the US and is available on all of their menus in all 37 of their US locations. And this July, after our report was published, they announced an exciting partnership with Long John Silver's. And Long John Silver's is the United States' largest quick service seafood chain. So 2 of their breaded seafood products are featured as the national restaurant chain's first plant-based seafood offerings and are available in select restaurants in the US. And in August, the wholesale retailer BJ's began carrying bulk packs of Good Catch's plant-based crab cakes. So here's a quote from the Chief Marketing Officer of Long John Silver's. It's a long quote, but I'll highlight the second part. So in referring to the addition of Good Catch seafood products to their menus, Stephanie Mattingly says that the perfect taste and texture paired with our classic menu items lets customers try something new without sacrificing the familiarity of food they already enjoy. So hearing the CMO of the United States' largest quick service seafood chain speak about plant-based seafood in this manner is definitely a big step, and it's one that's indicative of the momentum that the industry is seeing. And in this section, I'll highlight a few of the larger food companies and conventional meat and seafood companies that have launched their own alternative seafood products and or brands. So given the size of the global market opportunity that alternative seafood presents, we're starting to see increased attention on alternative seafood from large food companies, including those incumbent meat and seafood companies. So here are a few of the large food companies and incumbent players that have launched their own alternative seafood products or brands. And as we strive to make alternative seafood more delicious, affordable, and accessible, bringing companies like this along for the alternative seafood ride is incredibly important. So they have massive research and development budgets, manufacturing capacity, and established supply chains and distribution channels. And the incumbent seafood industry players also bring with them the extensive sensory knowledge of conventional seafood. They're well positioned to apply that expertise to recreating the sensory experience with alternative proteins. And I'm just going to highlight a few of these companies in the next few slides. So to start, we have Thai Union, the Thai-based conventional seafood giant, and they have been increasingly more active in the alternative protein space over the last few years. They're a member of the Smart Protein Consortium, which is a partnership between 30 plus universities, research institutions, corporations, and nonprofits in the EU that are seeking to develop the next generation of proteins. Excuse me. In 2021, they launched the OMG Meat line in Thailand, which offers a range of plant-based products, including crab meat and fish nuggets. And they say that they got into the plant-based market because of a clear demand from their customers. They also expressed excitement about producing plant-based seafood because of their expertise in conventional seafoods, taste and texture. And they're planning to launch a plant-based shrimp by the end of the year. They've also recently gotten involved in the cultivated seafood space, as I mentioned, with the MOU with Blue Nalu. And I've included this quote in the blue box because I think it highlights the sentiments of the incumbent meat and seafood industry companies who are realizing the significant role that alternative seafood can play in our global markets. So Thai Union's Global Innovation Director said that sustaining ocean life while also being able to deliver nutrition to consumers around the world is a key focus for the Global Innovation Center and Thai Union. And it's important that we are able to maintain a leading position in this area. In 2020, the multinational corporation Nestle introduced a plant-based tuna product called Luna. It's sold under their Garden Gourmet brand, and it's available in retail in Switzerland with plans for more global distribution. So in July of this year, they began working with cultivated meat company Future Meat on blending cultivated and plant-based meat to produce what's referred to as a blended or hybrid protein. And while Future Meat isn't currently working on cultivated seafood, I just thought it was significant to point out their involvement in the alternative protein space across different segments. And it's not just the big name players that are capitalizing on the opportunity that alternative seafood presents. The Plant-Based Seafood Co. was started by the small family-owned conventional seafood company Van Cleef in 2019. And recently they spun the plant-based portion of their company into its own company due to massive interest in their products. Their mind-blown coconut shrimp was named Most Disruptive Product of 2020 at Prepared Foods Spirit of Innovation Awards. And in 2021, they announced a partnership with wholesale marketplace Pod Foods for US retail launch this past spring. They're also planning to phase out their conventional seafood business to focus fully on their plant-based line and transition their conventional operations to seaweed farming. So to close out this kind of notable partnerships and launches section, I just wanted to share this quote from Fishtag, which is a Brazilian conventional seafood supplier with a strong focus on sustainability and traceability. So Fishtag is partnering with a Brazilian research institute to do some seafood cell line characteristic work for cultivated seafood. And the head of business and development said, "My view is that the future of the food/protein industry will be cell-based." This is a powerful statement coming from a conventional seafood supplier, and one that we're hearing echoed more and more by other incumbent industry players. Just going to take a brief pause, if you're tired of listening to my voice, hope not, to launch one more poll. Give me a moment, because I'm curious, how many of you have tried alternative seafood? All right, here we go. We'll give just 1 minute. Oh, wow, we have 252 participants now. Welcome, everyone. All right, I'm going to give it 10 more seconds. Still getting lots of answers. Okay, let's see. So the majority haven't tried it. Second, we have folks who have tried it once or twice, and then only 9% eat it regularly. Thank you all for sharing. All right. So now I'm gonna dive into the numbers. In the past few years, we've seen an increase in investment activity in alternative seafood globally. And this slide shows an overview of recent investment activity for alternative seafood companies. So note that this only includes disclosed amounts, so it's likely significantly understated. Also, we didn't include companies such as Gardein or Omni Foods who produce alternative seafood in addition to other alternative meat products. And as you can see, the first half of 2021 saw record investments already exceeding those of 2020's numbers. So as of June 2021, there's been $116 million of invested capital across 7 deals with disclosed deal sizes. And in total, in 2021, there have been 11 disclosed deals. So the size of 4 deals were not disclosed. And there's a lot of text on this slide, but I'll summarize it for you. The main takeaway from this slide and the previous slide is that investments in this space are skyrocketing, but the industry is still very, very small. So in just the first half of 2021, $116 million was invested in alternative seafood, which is 42% of all the investments made in alternative seafood since 2013. And that's only the first half of 2021. 53% of the deals made since 2013 took place in 2020 and the first half of 2021. And 73% of the investors who have invested in alternative seafood since 2013 did so in 2020 and the first half of 2021. Half of the investors that invested in alternative seafood are venture capitalists. The rest are accelerators and incubators, angel groups, corporate VCs and corporations, and a small minority of governments. And in 2021, cultivated seafood company Blue Nalu raised $60 million in debt financing after a $20 million Series A round in 2020. And the industry has only seen 2 Series B rounds, and both have been from Gathered Foods, which is the makers of Good Catch plant-based seafood products. And it's only seen 4 Series A rounds. So this data is from PitchBook, which classifies a lot of deals as early stage VC. So there might technically be more Series A rounds that aren't classified as such in PitchBook. And while the majority of this presentation focuses on the global alternative seafood industry, sadly, we only have reliable sales data from the US. So in this section, I'm going to talk about 2020 retail sales data. And because cultivated seafood is not yet available in the US, this data pertains only to plant-based sales. Across the United States, plant-based seafood retail sales increased by 23% in 2020. So despite the impressive $2 million growth, plant-based seafood still remains a small fraction of the overall plant-based meat and seafood category, which we can see in this slide. So alternative seafood is well positioned to capitalize on the momentum of the rest of the plant-based industry, which is continuing to grow. But at a starting point, to kind of help us quantify that opportunity, we can look at where plant-based meat is today. So plant-based meat makes up 1.4% of the dollar share amount of all meat products in the US, meaning conventional animal-based meat as well as plant-based meat. And compared to plant-based meat's 1.4%, plant-based seafood only makes up 0.1% of the total dollar share amount of all seafood products in the US. And that's a $15 billion industry. So to start, just increasing the dollar share amount of seafood, of plant-based seafood by 1.3%, so that it's on par with where plant-based meat is, we're looking at a $221 million opportunity. And we know that the majority of seafood purchases are made away from home. So this opportunity is many times larger when you factor in restaurant and food service sales. And we can take it one step further and compare plant-based seafood's dollar share to that of plant-based milk, which is at 15% of all milk sales. So for plant-based seafood to reach 15% of total seafood shares, we're looking at a $2.5 billion opportunity. And this table compares conventional seafood retail sales with plant-based seafood retail sales, both in the US. So the ranking 1 through 4 is based on the total retail sales dollar amounts from the products in 2020. And as you can see, the second highest grossing conventional product, salmon, isn't represented in the top 4 for plant-based sales. So this suggests an opportunity for more plant-based seafood producers to focus on developing delicious alternative salmon products to meet the needs of omnivores, flexitarians, and pescatarians in the US. So there's very little alternative seafood specific consumer research available globally. In 2020, GFI commissioned US specific alternative seafood consumer research, and you can view the entire report on our website. Jen will share the link to it in the chat in a moment. And we're currently working on similar research in 4 Asia Pacific countries, and those results will be published before the end of the year. But in 2020, we hired Kelton Global to survey 2,500 US consumers, and each participant was asked preliminary questions about their seafood consumption and other dietary preferences before being split into plant-based and cultivated groups. They were provided with a brief intro to the technology platform, and each group was then asked a series of questions about either plant-based or cultivated seafood and their motivations and barriers around consuming it. So the main top line takeaway from this research is that taste, followed by other sensory characteristics, is the most important characteristic for consumers when deciding to eat any seafood, whether it's conventional or alternative. Participants cited price as the most significant barrier to consuming conventional seafood. And they cited taste, followed by texture and accessibility of products, as the most significant barriers to consuming plant-based seafood. And while cultivated seafood isn't yet available in the US, consumers cited taste and texture as hypothetical leading barriers to cultivated seafood consumption. So consumers were grouped into 3 categories: alternative seafood rejector, alternative seafood interested, and alternative seafood enthusiast, based on how appealing they found and how likely they were to purchase plant-based or cultivated seafood. So here we can see how each group of prospective alternative seafood consumers breaks down by dietary preference. And notably, a large amount of pescatarians and flexitarians are interested in or enthusiastic about alternative seafood, and very few are in these categories are alternative seafood rejectors. It's 15% and 12%. Alternative seafood enthusiasts tend to have a greater tendency to try new products than all other consumers, while alternative seafood rejectors tend to stick to what they know and to avoid substitutions. So this speaks to both the value of alternative seafood tapping into novelty for early adopters, but also signifies the importance of achieving familiarity in order to appeal to the alternative seafood rejectors. We also see that the majority of consumers consider themselves knowledgeable about health and nutrition. So this suggests that focusing on health and health messaging can play a role in successful early adoption of alternative seafood products. And this is a total unduplicated reach and frequency analysis, and it demonstrates ideal messaging to reach the maximum number of consumers. Again, taste is table stakes for plant-based seafood and cultivated seafood, which I'll show on the following slide. And messaging about products' environmental, health, and functional benefits can bring additional consumers into the category. So for plant-based seafood, the most compelling environmental messaging is on reduction of overfishing, while the most compelling health benefits are around omega-3 fatty acids. And once consumers have a positive impression of the flavor of alternative seafood, messaging focused on these benefits are likely to make products more appealing to consumers. And we see the same overall results from the cultivated analysis, the only differences being the specifics of the environmental and health messaging. So for cultivated seafood, messaging about these products, ocean habitat benefits, protein content, lack of a quote unquote fishy smell, and reduction in plastic waste produced by ocean fishing can bring additional consumers into the category, again, after that flavor is achieved. So consumer research is incredibly valuable, but we all know that segment growth comes from actual sales and not just surveys. And I wanted to highlight a shift in the conventional seafood consumer demand space. So from 2019 to 2020, we saw a 12% increase in sustainability-focused retail shoppers in the US. Large corporations such as Walmart, Cisco, and Kroger have committed to varying degrees of sustainable seafood sourcing. So these retailers see the demand for more sustainable products and are incorporating them into their sustainability goals. So based on our consumer research, environmental sustainability is a huge selling point for alternative seafood once that flavor hurdle is reached, and one that can be capitalized on by companies who have existing sustainability goals. So one of the core ways that GFI supports the alternative protein space is by identifying white space opportunities and sharing those. So in this final section before the Q&A, I'm going to speak about some of the opportunities in alternative seafood. Most plant-based seafood products available for purchase in the US are either shelf-stable, like a canned tuna, or frozen. But if we look at the global trends from 1962 to 2018 on the graph on the left, we see that fresh and frozen fish and shellfish make up the majority of seafood sold in the world. And those segments are only continuing to grow. But in the US in 2019, $0 sales came from the refrigerated section. And the category was pretty much dominated by frozen products. So as technologies continue to improve, we really hope to see a lot more focus on refrigerated plant-based seafood in order to reach those consumers who buy fresh or chilled conventional seafood. And I've spoken a bit about health and omega-3 content. And in order to appeal to health-conscious consumers, alternative seafood products should contain similar omega-3 fatty acids, especially DHA and EPA, similar omega-3 content to the conventional version. So at the moment, animal-free omega-3s can be expensive and the supply can be inconsistent or volatile. And a lot of alternative seafood companies who are incorporating these into their products are purchasing supplemental grade omega-3s, which are sold at a premium. So, jack up the price of the alternative product. So scaling up the animal-free omega-3, I love how that rhymes, production is really critical and crucial to the success of the alternative seafood market. We also see, an opportunity to add these animal-free omega-3s to other alternative proteins whose conventional versions don't typically contain omega-3s, like a beef or chicken, to create nutritionally enhanced products. And so there aren't plenty of fish in the sea, but there are plenty of different species of fish in the sea. And humans consume 200 to 300 different species of seafood around the world. and alternative seafood companies are only making a handful of them so far. So there are really nearly endless opportunities to develop novel products that appeal to different markets around the world. And as we saw in consumer research, again, I'm going to just keep hitting this, driving this point. It's incredibly necessary for alternative seafood products to achieve taste and texture parity with conventional seafood. So with these more sophisticated manufacturing methods, it's possible to create layers of fat, collagen, and protein that give fish its desirable taste, texture, and cooking properties. We're seeing amazing innovation in this space every day, and companies are continuing to raise the bar. But as I mentioned, there's still no clear alternative seafood winner in the way that Impossible and Beyond kind of lead the plant-based terrestrial meat sector. So if you leave this webinar and don't remember a thing, I hope you just remember this slide, because the main takeaway is that the alternative seafood industry is seeing tremendous growth, especially in the past 2 years. However, it's still a white space industry, and there is a lot of room for growth. It's an incredibly exciting time to enter this space, and GFI is here to support its growth.